saved a nation, but it nearly destroyed him. Abraham Lincoln is remembered as a hero, but behind closed doors, he was breaking. In this story, we reveal the emotional battle that history tried to forget. Let's dive in.
Picture the weight of an entire nation's future pressing on a single pair of shoulders. The country stands on the edge of a precipice, torn by civil war and moral chaos. And the man at the center of it all, Abraham Lincoln, carries an unshakable resolve shaped by empathy and unwavering moral conviction. But what if that very empathy, the capacity to feel so deeply for others, became both his greatest strength and his most painful burden? In this episode, we explore how Lincoln's profound compassion guided him through America's darkest days, even as it weighed heavily on his soul. Abraham Lincoln is remembered today as the 16th President of the United States, the great emancipator, and a leader who navigated the nation through its most devastating internal conflict, the Civil War. Born in a log cabin in Kentucky in 1809, Lincoln came from humble beginnings, working tirelessly to educate himself and rise in the world. His words, sober, pointed, and steeped in moral clarity, reshaped America's sense of identity. Yet beyond the speeches and iconic beard, Lincoln was a deeply introspective, at times melancholy figure. He fought private battles with self-doubt and depression, even as he marshaled armies and political factions. In bridging these two worlds, his own quiet anguish and the monumental crisis of the Union, Lincoln's empathy became the cornerstone of his leadership. It allowed him to connect with ordinary Americans, but it also intensified the weight of every decision, every lost life, and every moral compromise. His greatest gift was also his most unrelenting struggle. Lincoln's formative years in frontier towns forged a work ethic and resilience that would define his career. Self-educated by candlelight, he immersed himself in law and literature. He moved from manual labor jobs to becoming a lawyer and then a politician, serving in the Illinois General Assembly and briefly in the U.S. House of Representatives. Throughout these years, his innate empathy and storytelling prowess shone in courtrooms and debates. He learned to capture hearts with authenticity, winning over skeptical crowds with his understated yet passionate rhetoric. By the 1850s, the United States was fracturing over the issue of slavery. Growing tensions between North and South cast a long shadow over the nation's future. Lincoln, initially hesitant to enter the national spotlight, found his moral convictions pulling him into the fight. His series of debates with Stephen A. Douglas in 1858 underscored not just his formidable intellect, but also his deep concern for the moral direction of the country. Though he lost that Senate race, the public recognized an emerging figure who spoke plainly yet eloquently on the evils of slavery. In 1860, the Republican Party nominated him for president. His victory, achieved with little support from the South, ignited a cascade of secession across southern states. America was on the brink of civil war. As the new president-elect, Lincoln's heartfelt desire to preserve the Union clashed with the immensity of the conflict bearing down on him, an early sign of the profound emotional burden he would carry. When Lincoln took office, he faced the immediate crisis of Southern secession and the bombardment of Fort Sumter in April 1861. The Civil War had begun. Behind the firm public persona, he wrestled with the unfolding tragedy. Thousands of Americans poised to kill one another in a war over the very soul of the nation. Lincoln's empathy for both Union and Confederate soldiers was an internal struggle. He recognized that, for many in the South, defending their home states felt like a patriotic duty. Yet in his core, he believed that preserving the Union and ending slavery was a moral imperative. Balancing these convictions became an almost impossible task. He grieved the mounting casualties as if he personally bore responsibility for each life lost. A pivotal moment emerged with the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862. It was a bold stroke that redefined the war's purpose, making the abolition of slavery a central aim. For Lincoln, this step was both liberating and agonizing. He had always felt slavery was fundamentally wrong. However, he also feared alienating border states and moderate Northerners, which could jeopardize the Union's precarious alliance. Proceeding anyway was testament to his moral resolve, a decision guided by compassion and justice, even at the risk of deepening the country's divisions. As the war ground on, the body count soared into the hundreds of thousands. Lincoln spent sleepless nights reading casualty reports and personal letters from grieving families. From the carnage of Antietam to the prolonged siege of Vicksburg, every Union victory came at a staggering cost. His empathy, so vital to his leadership, cut him to the bone. He found small solace in letters to generals or visits to hospitals, offering kind words to wounded soldiers, sometimes penning heartfelt notes to families who lost loved ones on the battlefield. This emotional burden affected his mental health. Witnesses recall seeing him pacing the halls of the White House late at night, lines of worry etched into his face. Known to suffer from bouts of depression long before he entered office, the war amplified his inner struggles. Although friends and advisors sometimes urged him to distance himself from the suffering, Lincoln refused. If leading a nation at war demanded empathy, he would bear that weight, even though it drained him. His unwavering commitment ultimately preserved the Union and ended institutional slavery. But the war ravaged Lincoln's spirit as much as it devastated the country. By the time Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse in April 1865, Lincoln was physically and emotionally exhausted. Just days later, his life was cut short by John Wilkes Booth's bullet. The man whose heart bled for America's wounds was never given the chance to see the healing that followed. Lincoln's leadership exemplifies the paradox of empathy. The capacity to connect deeply with others can become a painful weight in times of crisis. On a psychological level, this duality is evident in his well-documented struggles with depression. He channeled heartbreak and inner anguish into a driving moral force that guided critical decisions. But such emotional investment also meant bearing an extraordinary level of personal grief. Philosophically, Lincoln's experience presents the challenge of principled leadership. He demonstrated that genuine compassion must, at times, resolve itself through difficult, even violent conflict. His moral clarity about preserving the Union and ending slavery clashed with a heartbreak for those conscripted into a war they might not fully understand. This tension underscores one of the hardest truths in governance. Real change often demands sacrifice, and leaders must shoulder the emotional aftermath. Lincoln also taught the world the importance of humility in leadership. He didn't pretend to have all the answers, famously telling stories or self-deprecating jokes to break tension and maintain perspective. Through it all, his empathy kept him grounded in the belief that, no matter the hardships, a better future was worth fighting for, even if it took a personal toll. In an era rife with cultural and political divides, Lincoln's story remains a testament to the power and perils of empathetic leadership. What can we learn from his example? First, the true leaders can't turn a blind eye to suffering. They must confront it directly if they hope to resolve it. Second, empathy is not weakness. It can be the moral compass that cuts through partisan noise to find a shared humanity. Yet Lincoln's life also serves as a caution. Carrying the weight of an entire country's pain exacts a profound emotional cost. Leaders today, whether in boardrooms, political arenas, or community movements, must find ways to balance compassion with self-care and realistic boundaries. Lincoln shows us that no matter how noble the cause, leadership is always a human endeavor, fraught with doubts and heartbreak, but fueled by hope and love for one's people. Reflect on the legacy of Abraham Lincoln, a man whose deep compassion became the crucible of his greatest triumphs and his greatest trials. Ask yourself, are you willing to shoulder the emotional truths of those you lead? And if so, how will you ensure it doesn't break you? His life invites us to shape a more empathetic world, one decision at a time.